Hello, this is Sudarshana Starshine Star. Welcome to my channel. Today, gosh, I can't believe that it's going to be the summary of this series that I've created called What Every American Needs to Know. So this will be part 10 in that series, and it will be a summary. I called part 9 a scorcher, but this is a double scorcher. So thank you so much for being here with me. And I like to begin all of my clips with 3 opening prayers to heal and protect and bless this teaching session, this learning session, this sharing session. So let's go. Om, Om, Om. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshvaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahmam, Tasmahi Sri Guruvena Namaha. Om Suklam Bharataram Vishnum, Sishivarnam Chatubhujam, Prasanavaranam Dhyaye Sarva Vigno Prashante. Om Bhur Bhuva Suvaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I'm going to be reading the summary of this wonderful book called Meet Your Strawman and Whatever You'd Like to Know. And I will be showing the cover of that book at the end of this clip, so you can purchase that for yourself if you like. I do recommend, though, if this is the first clip in this series called What Every American Needs to Know Now, I really suggest that you go back and watch part 1 first. You really do need to understand the fundamentals of what a straw man is and how that directly applies to you and your children and your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents and so on and so forth. So, let's see. Here we go. Summary. Before you were born, the bankers operated a scam intended to rob all members of the general public. They removed all forms of money and replaced it with worthless notes which read, "I promise to pay the bearer, ... with another worthless banknote. They then managed to do away with the government and replace it with a group of commercial companies which they own. They cunningly named these companies so that they look like a government. They took over the printing of the worthless banknotes with their private company called the Bank of England, which is meant to sound like a government organization, although it most definitely isn't. The next step in their cunning plan was to get their company, which sounds like the government, to ask their other company, the non-federal, Federal Reserve, to print them lots of worthless money and to charge interest on that money, over and above the face, quote-unquote, value of the currency. This excess interest amount is called the, quote-unquote, national debt, in order to fool ordinary people into believing that their country somehow owes somebody large amounts of money. Firstly, there's actually nothing owed at all. Secondly, there is no money. Thirdly, the country does not owe anything, and in the unlikely event that there were a genuine debt, then it has nothing to do with ordinary people, as it is just a national debt incurred by one commercial company to another commercial company owned by the same people. This supposed debt has been boosted over the years to a ridiculous level, which could never, ever be paid off. And you will no doubt be glad to learn that all income tax is now paid to the owners of these commercial companies. Isn't it great to be paying vast sums of money to a commercial company which has never done anything for you and which holds you in utter contempt because you haven't discovered their scam and continue to pay lots of ridiculous taxes, fees, and charges, none of which you need to pay at all? Combined, these charges amount to more than 80% of a person's earned income. Do you enjoy living on 1/5 of what you actually earn? To strengthen their scam, they have invented a language of lies called legal terminology, where they have changed the meanings of ordinary English words in order to abuse and rob ordinary members of the public. They have set up a company called the Law Society to train up unscrupulous people in their methods of deception and lies. Their commercial company, which pretends to be the government, keeps inventing new statutes, which they pretend are laws, which they most definitely are not. And they keep telling everybody that they must obey these laws. And they have subverted policemen and policewomen and convinced them that they have to enforce these statutes. The primary aim of these statutes is to take cash, goods, and property from members of the public who have not yet discovered that it is a scam being run against them. Many police officers are probably themselves ignorant of the fact that statutes are purely optional and no human is actually bound by them. Just to clarify the situation, breaches of the law are dealt with in a genuine court with a jury. All other matters, such as taxation, bank loans, parking restrictions, speed limits, and the like, are dealt with in a fake quote-unquote court, which is a commercial company and part of a violent protection racket-style scam which is wholly unlawful, but enforced by violence, threats, and intimidation using bailiffs and police to protect the bailiffs from being attacked. There has never been any law which demands that you pay any form of tax, license, or other charge. What you decide to do is entirely up to yourself. You can continue to give away most of your income to fund people who want to harm you, or you can decide to step outside this corrupt system and stop paying these people. All humans are born equal, so nobody has the right to order you around unless you agree to give them that right, and the choice is yours. But that is just the first step. Excuse me, I skipped a page. Excuse me for just a moment. Okay. An overview of a political con job. If this has all been a lot of new information for you, then it might be useful to have a thumbnail sketch of the outrageous confidence trick which is being played on you. So here it is for your local area, and the same situation is found in almost every other area as well. It all started before most people were born. It started with two brothers deciding to run a scam which would make them the richest people in the world and rig things so that everybody else worked for them without being aware of that fact. Even though they are literally brothers, in order to distinguish between them, we will call them Mr. Government and Mr. Banker, because that is what they needed to become in order to run this scam. Mr. Government set up a very clever system of interlocking commercial companies, choosing names for them which made them look like official government bodies, while in reality they are just ordinary companies, just like any high street shop. In order to strengthen the illusion, Mr. Government hires people to work for him and gives them names like Congressman, or Member of Parliament, or some other meaningless working title. He employs most of them to sit around and argue with each other, and from time to time he swaps them around by asking members of the public to vote for who will be his employees for the next few years. This is actually very clever, because it makes members of the public believe that their voting makes a difference, while Mr. Government knows that it doesn't, as he sets company policy, and he makes all of the decisions, and he really couldn't care less who happened to be his employees at any given moment in time. Meanwhile, his brother, Mr. Banker, has set up two commercial companies of his own. One he calls the Federal Reserve, or the Bank of England, or some other suitable name for his particular location. And yes, there are actually more than two brothers in this family. The other company he calls the Mint. He owns both, and so decides exactly what each will do. The action starts, and Mr. Government needs money with which to pay his employees, so he asks his brother, Mr. Banker, to provide some. This is where the fun part starts. Our trusty Mr. Banker invents the money and pretends that he has plenty, although he actually has none. He lends, quote unquote, a large amount, say $1 million, to his brother, Mr. Government. This costs him nothing, as it doesn't even exist, and is just the first step in the scam. His brother, Mr. Government, now says that he has a national debt of $1,200,000, which will increase by 20%, 1/5, every year if it is not paid off completely. His cunning plan of calling it a national debt makes people think that their country owes somebody something. The reality is that nobody owes anybody anything. Good, isn't it? Very clever. Without using anything of any value, the brothers have persuaded people that A, they have a government, which they don't, and B, that their country has borrowed money for essential services, so their country is in debt to some kindly lender, which it isn't. Very slick. These brothers aren't stupid. Next, Mr. Government pays members of his staff with pieces of paper called checks, and he sends them to his brother, Mr. Banker, to get those pieces of paper exchanged for quote-unquote money. But Mr. Banker does not have any money, so instead he gets his company, the Mint, to print other pieces of paper called currency, and he passes these out in exchange for his brother's checks, swapping pieces of paper for other pieces of paper. What is the value of these pieces of paper? The cost of the printing, paper, and ink. At this point, what have the brothers gained? Well, they have got a large number of people working for them, doing whatever they say, and it is costing them nothing. But that is just the first step. Now Mr. Government takes back 80% of what he quote-unquote paid to his employees in the form of taxation. After all, the country is in debt, and so Mr. Government has to take money from everybody in order to repay the country's debt, hasn't he? Why does everybody have to pay? Because his employees say so. They invent statutes and all kinds of charges designed to move money from ordinary people into the pockets of Mr. Government, who promptly pays most of it to his brother, Mr. Banker, as the repayment of borrowing, nothing, and interest on the amount borrowed. Where does the tax money paid by ordinary people come from? It is paid to them to compensate them for the time and effort which they put in when working. This is real money, backed by the goods and services provided by the people who do the work. This is something of real value, and yet 80% of those valuable assets are taken back from them by Mr. Government. Why do people let this happen? Because they think that they have no choice and we will be put in prison if they don't. What they do not understand is that paying tax is optional, and they don't have to if they don't want to. Mr. Banker is doing very well out of this. His brother is paying him lots of real money in exchange for the fake money, which he invented. So he decides to expand his business and do exactly the same thing to as many people as he can. He offers to lend people money, which he will invent and conjure up out of nothing, in order to allow them to buy whatever they want. We will skip the strawman here and just focus on the actual transaction offered by Mr. Banker. A house purchaser comes to Mr. Banker looking for a loan of $100,000. This is a deal on which Mr. Banker can't lose no matter what happens. So he will approve the deal unless he has some very, very good reason for not doing so. After all, it's not going to cost him anything, and he will be paid with real money gained through real work done by real people. The deal is for 17% interest per year for 25 years. If the deal runs for the full 25 years, then the borrower may well pay back as much as $433,557 according to a professional mortgage calculator result. That is, you pay back 4 times what you borrowed, even though what you were given was fake money, and what you pay back is real labor-backed money. But as Mr. Government takes 80% of what you earn before you get to pay the mortgage, you need to earn $2,167,785 in that 25-year period, as Mr. Government will take $1,734,228 of it away from you in direct and hidden taxes. And to add insult to injury, Mr. Government will take a large chunk of that $1,734,228 and give it to his brother, Mr. Banker, in supposed payment of the fake national debt. So the house purchaser pays several times the borrowed amount using his real money. It gets worse. Mr. Banker and Mr. Government make sure that not enough currency is issued for people to be physically capable of paying the interest on their loans, as there just isn't enough currency in the entire economy for that to be possible. This is another cunning ploy. The people who earn most will not have a problem, but most of the people will have great difficulty and will have very little left after paying their mortgage. The slightest financial problem, such as losing a job, can put the average person in a position where he can't pay the amount demanded. When that happens, and it has to happen in a substantial number of cases, then Mr. Banker tries to take the property, using some of his brother's statutes, which are not law, to justify his theft. He may even manage to send in bailiffs ahead of seizing the property, and seize many of the house purchaser's personal possessions as well. What the house purchaser needs to remember is that the original quote-unquote loan was fake, and that Mr. Banker never put up anything of value. The purchaser was never told the real amount which he would have to repay. A genuine contract was never drawn up, and in reality, it is not the human borrower which is being asked for the repayment. Want to know what Mr. Banker thinks of any borrower? For evil to triumph, all that is necessary is for good men to do nothing. For example, why did the United States attack Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent in taking down Iran in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we are on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it on what we are taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, Britain, with agreement, established the dollar as the world's reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audit or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold, and in response they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On 15th of August, Nixon made the following announcement. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and in conditions determined to be in the interests of monetary stability and in the best interests of the United States. This was obviously not a temporary suspension as he claimed, but rather a permanent default, and for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold. It was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars in payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil importing country in the world to maintain a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the petrodollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditure surpassed that of all of the other nations in the world combined. The Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the start of a new era of stability and peace. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas. Within that same year, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War, and after crushing the Iraqi military and destroying their infrastructure, including hospitals and water purification plants, crippling sanctions were imposed which prevented Iraq's infrastructure from being rebuilt. These sanctions, which were initiated by Bush Sr. and sustained throughout the entire Clinton administration, lasted for over a decade and were estimated to have killed more than 500,000 children. The Clinton administration was fully aware of these figures. A TV interviewer speaking to Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State for Clinton, asked, "We have heard that 500,000 children have died, and I mean, that's more than died in Hiroshima, and is the price worth it?" To which Madeleine Albright replied, "I think that this is a very hard choice. We think that the price is worth it." Miss Albright, what exactly was worth killing 500,000 children for? In November of 2000, Iraq began selling its oil exclusively in euros. This was a direct attack on the dollar and on U.S. financial dominance, and it wasn't going to be tolerated. In response, the U.S. government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, began to build up a mass propaganda campaign claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. In 2003, the U.S. invaded, and once they had control of the country, oil sales were immediately switched back to dollars. This is particularly noticeable as switching back to the dollar meant a 15% to 20% loss in revenue due to the euro's higher value. It doesn't make any sense at all unless you take the petrodollar into account. On 2nd March 2007, U.S. General Wesley Clark said, "So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, 'Are we still going to war with Iraq?' And he said, 'Oh, it's worse than that.' He said as he reached over his desk and picked up a piece of paper, and he said, 'I just got this down from upstairs today,' meaning from the Secretary of Defense's office. This is a memo which describes how we are going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting off with Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. Let's take a look at the events of the past decade and see if you see a pattern. In Libya, Gaddafi was in a process of organizing a bloc of African countries to create a gold-based currency called the dinar, which they intended to use to replace the dollar in that region. U.S. and NATO forces helped to destabilize and topple the government in 2011, and after taking control of the region, U.S. armed rebels executed Gaddafi in cold blood and immediately set up the Libyan Central Bank. Iran has been actively campaigning to pull oil sales off the dollar for some time now, and it has recently secured agreements to trade its oil in exchange for gold. In response, the U.S. government, with mainstream media assistance, has been attempting to build international support for military strikes on the pretext of preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. In the meantime, they established sanctions which they admit are aimed at causing a collapse of the Iranian economy. Syria is Iran's closest ally, and they are bound by mutual defense agreements. The country is currently in the process of being destabilized with covert assistance from NATO, and although Russia and China have warned the United States not to get involved, the White House has made statements in the past month indicating that they are considering military intervention. It should be clear that military intervention in Syria and Iran isn't just being considered. It is a foregone conclusion. Just as it was in Iraq and Libya, the U.S. is actively working to create the context which gives them the diplomatic cover to do what they have already planned. The motive for these invasions and covert actions becomes clear when we look at them in their full context and connect the dots. Those who control the United States understand that if even a few countries begin to sell their oil in another currency, it will set off a chain reaction and the dollar will collapse. They understand that there's absolutely nothing holding up the value of the dollar at this point, and so does the rest of the world. But instead of accepting the fact that the dollar is nearing the end of its lifespan, the powers that be have made a calculated gambit. They have decided to use the brute force of the U.S. military to crush each and every resistant state in Africa and the Middle East. That in itself would be bad enough. But what you need to understand is that this is not going to end with Iran. China and Russia stated publicly and in no uncertain terms that they will not tolerate an attack on Iran or Syria. Iran is one of their key allies, one of the last independent oil producers in the region. And they understand that if Iran falls, then they will have no way to escape the dollar without going to war. And yet the United States is pushing forward in spite of the warnings. What we are witnessing here is a trajectory which leads straight to the unthinkable. It is a trajectory which was mapped out years ago in full awareness of the human consequences. But who was it that put us on this course? What kind of psychopath is willing to intentionally set off a global conflict which will lead to millions of deaths just to protect the value of a fiat paper currency? It obviously isn't the president. The decision to invade Syria, Libya, and Iran was made long before Obama had risen to the national spotlight, and yet he is carrying out his duties just like the puppets who preceded him. So who is it that pulls the strings? Often the best answers to questions like these are found by asking another question. Cui è bono? Who benefits? Obviously, those who have the power to print the dollar out of thin air have the most to lose if the dollar were to fall. And since 1913, that power has been held by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private entity owned by a conglomerate of the most powerful banks in the world, and the men who control those banks are the ones who pull those strings. To them, this is just a game. Your life and the lives of those you love are just pawns on their chessboard. And like a spoiled 4-year-old who tips over the board to the floor when he starts to lose, the powers that be are willing to start World War III to keep control of the global financial system. Remember that when these wars accelerate and extend. Remember that when your son or your neighbor's son comes back in a flag-draped coffin. Remember that when they point the finger at the new boogeyman, because the madmen who are running this show will take this as far as you allow them to take it. So how much time do we have left? It's a question which I hear constantly, but it is the wrong question. Asking how much time we have left is a passive posture. It is the attitude of a prisoner who is waiting to be taken out to a ditch and shot in the back of the head. What are our chances? Can we change course? Also the wrong question. The odds don't matter anymore. If you understand what we are facing, then you have a moral responsibility to do everything in your power to alter the course we are on, regardless of the odds. It is only when you stop basing your involvement on the chances of your success that success actually becomes possible. To strip the ill-begotten power from the financial elites and bring these criminal cartels to justice will require nothing less than a revolution. The government is not going to save us. The government is completely infiltrated and corrupt to the core. Looking to them for a solution at this point is utterly naive. There are 3 stages of revolution, and they are sequential. Stage 1 is already underway. Stage 1 is the ideological resistance. In this stage, we have to actively work to wake up as many people as possible about what is happening and the direction we are headed. All revolutions originate from a shift in the mindset of the population, and no other meaningful resistance is possible without it. Success in this stage of the game can be measured by the contagion of ideas. When an idea reaches critical mass, it begins to spread on its own and seeps into all levels of society. In order to achieve that contagion, we need more people in this fight. We need more people speaking up, making videos, writing articles, getting this information onto the national and international stage, and we especially need to reach the military and the police. Stage 2 is civil disobedience, also known as nonviolent resistance. In this stage, you put your money where your mouth is, or more accurately, you withhold your money and your obedience from the government, and you do everything in your power to bring the gears of the state to a halt. Practiced in mass, this method alone is often enough to bring a regime to its knees. However, if it fails at this stage, stage 3 is inevitable. Stage 3 is direct physical resistance. Direct physical resistance is the last resort, and it should be avoided and delayed as long as possible, and only invoked when all other options have been thoroughly exhausted. There are those who talk tough and claim that they will resist when the time comes, but what they fail to realize is that if you are inactive during the first 2 stages and save your efforts for the last resistance, you will fail. When the Nazis in Germany were moving from door to door, dragging people out of their homes, that was the time to fight back physically. But due to the lack of ideological resistance and civil disobedience leading up to that moment, even an armed uprising would have likely failed at that point. An armed uprising can only succeed if the people have established an attitude of active resistance. An active resistance is only possible after their minds have broken free from the mainstream propaganda. If you want to fight back, then it's now or never. You're not going to get another chance, and the stakes are far higher than they were in Nazi Germany. Closing good news. One of the major attacks mounted against you is to con you out of your money. Much of this is government tax on fuels which are burnt to provide energy, energy for transport, energy for heating, cooling, lighting, cooking, washing, drying, communications, entertainment, ... A major effort has been put into attempting to prevent you from finding out the simple fact that we are all surrounded by limitless energy, and more importantly, preventing us from finding out how to tap into and use that energy. Tight control has been kept on educational establishments, publishing, and mainstream news services. Patents have been suppressed, inventors harassed, intimidated, and forced into silence by any available means. The reality is that energy can be pulled from the air using an aerial, and Hermann Plausen produced systems which provides more than 100 kilowatts of electrical energy and which needs no input whatsoever. There's nothing magical about this, as the energy comes from the ionosphere, which the sun continuously charges. So sorry folks, no magic, just practical engineering. Energy can be pulled from the ground, as the earth is a vast reservoir of energy. Energy can be taken from gravity by various methods, including just nudging weights sideways as they fall, powering a large wheel, which turns a generator. Energy can be drawn from changes in inertia, as just spinning a flywheel, which drives a generator, allows that generator to power both the flywheel and other items of household equipment. Ordinary, unmodified petrol generators can provide kilowatts of electrical power by splitting water into its component gases and using those gases to power the generator. Here, the generator both splits the water and powers the additional equipment. It is possible to build a simple motor generator which produces far more electrical power than is needed to make run. Robert Adams of New Zealand demonstrated this with quite small models which had a minimum of 8 times more output power than input power, while more advanced models have outputs hundreds of times greater than the input power. We are told, either tongue-in-cheek or based on complete ignorance, that permanent magnets can't do any useful work. Dietmar Hohl has shown that anybody can build a simple rotor drum which is made to spin using just permanent magnets. We are told that no electronics-driven transformer can output more than it is used to drive it. Tane Hines has demonstrated that this is not just true, while by adding a permanent magnet to the transformer, Lawrence Chung has shown that with just a simple iron frame, much more power can be drawn from the output than is needed to operate the frame. The supposed limits taught by educational establishments are based on electric transfer methods in transformers running at low speeds, such as 50 or 60 cycles per second. However, if the transfer is made to be magnetic rather than electrical, and the cycle frequency exceeds 20,000 cycles per second, and especially if the voltage is raised to a much higher level, then the output power from a simple motionless device can be kilowatts more than the input power. There are many ways to provide electrical power where no fuel is burnt and where you do not have to pay for whatever energy you happen to draw from the system. There is no need for you to do any of this, but it is important that you understand that it can be done. And there is actually no need for you to be charged for every watt of electrical energy you choose to use. Please download and read the ebook below. It is free, and above all else, please understand fully that this technology has been suppressed for personal gain for more than 100 years. And I have to add before I give the free ebook address, it's been suppressed for a lot more than 100 years. And I would also encourage people to look into Nikola Tesla, and you find out a lot of eye-opening information, and it's wonderful, it's astonishing. So the free ebook that is mentioned here, you go to http://www.free-energy-info.TUKS.n/L/P, J, K, B, lowercase k, .html. Wow, so that was the summary of this wonderful book. Let me show you. Meet Your Strawman and Whatever You Want to Know. And you can purchase that on Amazon. So, as I remarked at the end of part 9 of this series, this book was written obviously a few years ago, some years back. We are now in the incredible Second American Revolution. We are in World War IV, counting the Cold War as World War III. We are in the greatest war of consciousness. It's a digital war, but ultimately it's a war of consciousness that has ever been on this planet between light and dark. And that is in the heavenlies, and it is on planet Earth. It is an incredible time to be alive. Yes, it's very challenging, and no one could deny that, but it is a magnificent time to be alive. We chose to be here. We are contributing to and being a part of the great cleanup of all these criminal dark cult elites that have been in charge and running the world for over 6,000 years. There's a lot to clean up, but it's happening very quickly if you consider how long this corruption and this really filthy, dark way of being has been seeded into our civilizations. So it's hard to hear all this, especially if you're a proud American. But what has been going on has not been of we the people. It's been perpetrated by a very small group of beings, and they have lorded it over all the countries, not just the United States of America. So be proud to be an American. This is an amazing country, and America really is an idea, and it really is an ideal, and it really, whatever happens to America, really does affect the rest of this planet. And that's a proud position to be in, but it is up to us to reclaim that. So I hope you enjoyed this clip. I hope it was edifying. Thank you so much for liking this clip. Please do like this clip and share it. Hit the notification bell because I have more coming. And please share it. Thank you so much. I'm going to end now with the closing prayer. And what I say in the closing prayer is, God bless all beings in all worlds. Om, Om, Om. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. I'm sending you all of my love and hugs, and God bless you and yours now and always. So thank you so much for being with me here in this way via this clip, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye for now.